Good evening. Welcome to Periodic Tables. We're very excited to have Herman Pontzer here tonight. My name is Misha Angrist from the Duke Initiative for Science and Society. We're thrilled that you're here. I think you're in for a treat, and I'll say more about that in a second. I just want to tell you about next month, when I think you'll also be in for a treat, and that will be Tuesday, March 10th. We're going to have Katie Cannon from Carolina Tiger Rescue talking about the limitless charisma of big cats. Herman Pontzer is most importantly the pride of Du Bois, Pennsylvania. Kersey? Kersey, excuse me. Okay, never mind. So I actually had my introduction printed out on paper, and the busboy took it. So he studies how the human body evolves and how our species' deep past shapes our health and physiology. He investigates the physiology of humans and apes to understand how ecology, lifestyle, diet, and evolutionary history affect metabolism and health. He is associate professor of evolutionary anthropology at Duke, and he is going to talk to us about sorting paleo fact from paleo fiction. Herman Pontzer.
Thanks everybody for coming out. Thanks for the introduction. So the Du Bois Kersey distinction is critically important because I grew up in Kersey, Pennsylvania, and I went to St. Mary's Area High School, and we played Du Bois in ball, in football and stuff. So to say I'm from Du Bois, that's a little bit painful, but that's it. Oh, right. Actually, less painful because I wasn't born here. So anyway, but thanks everybody for coming out. I'm Herman Pontzer. I'm an anthropologist. I study human evolution. I study how the human body got to be the way it is. These days, I do that in laboratories and in the field, looking at physiology and looking at the body in motion. But when I started out in places like this, in the Republic of Georgia, at a site called Dmanisi, doing archaeology, digging up our past ancestors. And the reason I did that was that fossils are really cool, and human evolution I've just always found to be really fascinating. And the fossil evidence is the only sort of real tangible evidence we have to reconstruct the way that humans got to be so strange. And I would just like everyone to appreciate for a moment, because it's easy to forget, how deeply strange you are. We walk around on two legs. We have these big bulbous heads full of a brain that is, right now, as you sit there, every fifth breath you take is the oxygen just to feed your brain. It's so big and expensive. We're so weird as a species that we're the only ones who feel the need to cover ourselves up with clothing. Other animals don't worry about that. We're the Mexican hairless cats of the primate family. So humans are incredibly strange, and the history of how we got to be strange is the history of our evolution. I've always found that really fascinating. So this is a picture of me as a young tyke in graduate school, working at the site of Dmanisi, digging in it's a staged picture because you can see I have the brush in my hand. In reality, you have like the big pick thing and you're just gouging stuff out, but for the pictures, you always pick up a brush. And that looks like a happy picture, and I was pretty happy there, but actually, I know that's a sad picture because just below the surface was that. And I missed it by a couple days because you would switch squares, you can't stay in the same square all the time. So, but these are the guys we were after, and we found 5 of these skulls and attendant other parts of their body there. And it's, in the site in the Caucasus, which is where that picture is, where that flag is. And it was a really exciting place to be working because it captured a really important part of our evolution and this story of how we got to be these strange, weird things that we are today. And so if we think about the sort of the timeline of our evolution, Our closest relatives are who? Anybody know who the closest relatives to, except for Brian Hare's not allowed to answer? Who are the closest living relatives to humans? Bonobos and chimpanzees, right? So they're our sister taxon. How long ago did we split from them? Yeah, you're cheating. You're looking at the thing. But yeah, about 6 million years ago we split, and there's also there would be little dead ends on the chimp and bonobo line presumably as well. But we know we find lots of little dead ends on our own line. And for the first sort of 5 million years or so, we just sort of these kind of bipedal, apey-looking things. Not that interesting, quite frankly, but walking around on 2 legs, ape-sized brain, ape-like tools. And then around 2 million years ago, something really fundamental changes. And what happens is a couple things. First of all, we're no longer just in Africa. We get so clever and so ecologically adaptable and so amazing that we spread out all over the globe. And it's because we're not trapped. The reason that climate change and forest deforestation is going to kill all the other apes, spoiler alert, they're all going to go extinct. I'm sorry, but it's true. I hope that's not true, but I want to scare you a little bit. The reason that it's so scary that we cut down their forests is that they can't adapt and live anywhere else in the world, right? We can live anywhere we want. And that adaptability, that flexibility shows up about 2 million years ago. And we begin to call that thing, those species the genus Homo, because we're in the genus Homo sapiens. And things get smarter and start using more interesting tools. And what that is the beginning of the hunting and gathering niche. So humans are just the latest twig out of the genus Homo. And all of the genus Homo is this hunting and gathering genus. So it defines our genus. So, if we want to understand where we came from and how we got so weird, we have to understand what hunting and gathering is all about. Hunting and gathering, too, is also where things like big brains show up and things like a really active lifestyle show up. So apes are lazy, okay? So the chimpanzees, bonobos, and chimps, and gorillas, too, they get 3,000 steps a day. Who here is counting their steps every day? Right? What are you trying to go for? 10,000. Okay, and if you don't get 10,000 steps, you get sick. If they don't get 10,000 steps, they're fine. Because they're lazy. They're built to be lazy. But we're evolved to be really active, and that started when we started hunting and gathering. And so, the big changes that made us start here. And so I was doing this fossil work, looking back into our past, looking and trying to reconstruct how we evolved. And I got more and more interested as a researcher in what this did, how this hunting and gathering ecology kind of shaped the way we work, and importantly too, how it shaped the way that we interact with our world today. Because this hunting and gathering past that we all share, that's our common heritage, it gave us things that we still do today. So we still, we share food, we eat a mixed diet, we use our big smart brains to solve problems. Those are all the good things. But in our modern worlds that we live in today, this hunter-gatherer past sort of creates trouble. And that's because cities and supermarkets are recent and weird, right? That's not hunting and gathering. This isn't hunting and gathering what we're doing right now. And we have good reason to think that modernization makes us sick. So this change, these recent changes from living in a hunting and gathering lifestyle to living like we do today, makes us sick. And you guys know the grim statistics, but I'll show you anyway. Obesity and overweight is skyrocketing in the U.S. and other parts of the civilized world, developed industrialized world, I should say. Diabetes prevalence, which goes along with obesity, is high. Cancer and heart disease rates are up high. Interestingly, heart disease kind of plateaued in the 70s and starting to come back down as people are stopping smoking so much, but it's still much higher than it would have been in the deeper past. And so there's this overarching idea in public health that a lot of these, what we call diseases of civilization, come about because we've created this weird human zoo that we live in that's just so fundamentally different in the way that we get our food and the way we use our bodies from the hunter-gatherer past that shaped us. Right? So that's the idea in public health these days. You hear a lot that if we could just kind of recapture some of that paleo magic, if it's a paleo diet or a paleo lifestyle, or somehow live more like we used to in the past, that we wouldn't get sick. And so, as someone who works on hunter-gatherers these days, and as someone who was interested in hunting and gathering evolution in the past, in my past part of my career, that rings true. And that's because if we look at hunting and gathering groups today, we notice that they're incredibly healthy. The things that we're gonna die from in this room, spoiler alert, you're gonna die, and you're gonna die from stuff that they won't ever get sick with, that they're not even worried about. So hunting and gathering groups today, and in the recent past, don't have obesity, they don't have diabetes, they don't have heart disease. And just to sort of, work this through, a lot of times people say, well, the reason they don't have these diseases is because they didn't live long enough to get them, and that's actually not true. Average life expectancy is low. It's in the 30s for a lot of these groups, but that's because there's so much infant mortality and child mortality. And so the things that they die from in infancy and in childhood, the infectious diseases that we have antibiotics for, yes, that pulls their average life expectancy down. But it's actually pretty typical. If you make it through childhood, you get to be 15 years old in these societies, you can expect to live into your 50s, even your 60s and 70s, even in your 80s. And so these societies, people here are living to be plenty old enough to get these diseases, and they just don't do it. And again, we think it's because of their lifestyle. And so we can ask the question then, and this is sort of how I've transitioned my research career, away from trying to reconstruct our past evolution towards trying to understand what it is about our past that shapes our lives today. And we can ask the question then, how have activity and energetics and diet changed the way our bodies work today? And so that's what I do in my research. It's what my lab does, my team does, and a lot of my collaborators do. We try to understand how things have changed and exactly what's changed about our modern lives that tends to make us sick. And that has led us to working with living hunter-gatherers and other small-scale and traditional societies that still hold on to a lot of those ancient traditions that allow us to ask what those lifestyles were really like. And so we don't have to tell, Gary Larson Far Side cartoons about what the past was like or what, the Paleolithic was like. We don't have to listen to the Paleo bros and the bro science about what paleo diets are like. We can actually go to places that are still doing this stuff and learn from them and hopefully learn how to be healthier ourselves, but also by working with them, kind of get a window into what our past was like. And so that's what I want to focus on today. And I'll talk about diet and physical activity and energy expenditure and how that works in a hunting and gathering society and what that has to tell us about the way our lives work today. All right. So for me, this started with collaborations with a guy named David Reichlin and a guy named Brian Wood, working to understand energy expenditure and metabolism and daily life in a group called the Hodza. So the Hodza, which I'll talk a lot about, we'll get to know their daily life a little bit today. The Hodza are a hunting and gathering population in northern Tanzania. They live in these grass huts, as you can see here. There's about 2,000 of them in the population these days. They don't have any domesticated crops. They don't have any domesticated animals. They don't have any guns. They don't have any vehicles. They don't have any mechanized anything. Instead, they get by on food from their wild environment every day. So every morning they wake up in the morning, they go out into the wild landscape around them, and they get plant foods and animal foods and honey and whatever they can get from the wild environment around them, and that's what they live on every day. And so this is a population that holds on to a lot of the same kind of ecological traditions, cultural traditions that would have been pretty common back, hundreds of thousands of years into our hunting and gathering past. And so they are a nice window. No population living today is a perfect window into our past. Cultural diversity has been the norm forever. But they're a nice window into what our past might have been like. So let's visit the Hodza for a little bit, shall we? Here we go. So when you go and do this work, you basically it's a big camping trip. So Brian here, this is a trip we took in October. You pack up your Land Rovers full of stuff, and then you drive out into the savannah in northern Tanzania. There's no way to kind of call ahead right? You can't get on email and check in. There's no, they're not on your Gmail calendar. You just kind of drive out there and roll up into a Hodza camp. And this is the kind of thing you see, right? So living in grass huts like this, typical early morning scene for a Hodza camp. Moms are tired everywhere in the world. Kids are the same everywhere in the world. This kid's playing with a bow that his dad made him, probably. And anthropologists have been working with the Hodza for decades, actually, so they're not too shocked when you show up. The first thing you do is we have a conversation. Hey, we're back. They know Brian so well that they named their kids after him. And it's a funny story. One time, we were in a camp, and this is actually the first time I ever worked on a Hodza camp. And this woman came up, and she held out a little infant baby, and she said, "Brian." And he's like, "You named it Brian?" And she's like, "Yes." And he looked at us. He's like, "It's not what you think." Anyhow, they love Brian. So if you show up with Brian, my advice if you're going to do Hodza work is to collaborate with Brian Wood. And so we get there. This is a Hodza camp called Mkalenge up on the top of the Gadero Hills. And you can see a couple of nice Hodza houses here. And everybody who's smart gets out of the sun and sits in the shade while we talk. And so we have a community meeting, discuss what we're going to do that day, more like that week or that month. And they kind of they know what we're interested in, because the Hodza are kind of like the Amish in the U.S. They know they're different. They know that they're kind of special for holding on to their old traditional ways. They know about the outside world. It isn't like they don't know what's out there, but they really prefer to keep their old cultural traditions. And so they're not too surprised that people might want to understand them better, because they know that they're special. It's really kind of cool that they're so proud and hold on so strongly to their old traditions. Anyway, once we've had the talk and kind of discussed how we're going to do the work, we set up our camp as a Hodza cooking fire that we make for ourselves, and then you're in tents and stuff. This is sort of the laboratory / kitchen / hangout area / everything. And there's Brian there standing. Brian has done work over the past, 15 years now. He's probably spent more of his time in Hodza camps than he has in the U.S., studying Hodza culture and ecology. And he speaks Hodza language. When we speak with him, we typically speak Swahili, which is easier to learn than Hodza. He learned, he's been there so long, he's actually learned a lot of Hodza. And we've collaborated with Dave Reichland, who I mentioned earlier, and I have been working as sort of the physiologist as part of this team to understand Hodza physiology as part of what Brian's been doing out there. And so we turned that kitchen into a makeshift laboratory when we're out there, and this is collecting different samples and getting heights and weights and that kind of stuff. There's Dave looking, I almost said stoned. He's just hot, and he's got gloves on, just for the record, in case anybody's asking. So we get out there and do work in the heat. All right. So a typical day, in the Hodza starts at dawn, because the sun comes up and there's nothing else to do. So you wake up with the sun. This is a group of Hodza women kind of deciding where they're going to go that day. This is probably at 7 o'clock in the morning, and it's already, you can tell, really hot, bright sun. It's a pretty dry and arid landscape. And your first impression, if you're me anyway, getting out there, is what in the world is there possibly to eat in this environment? But if you know what you're doing, and you've lived here, and you've got the cultural knowledge they have, it's a landscape full of food. So you do a lot of walking. Women will go out in groups. They go about 8 kilometers a day. That's about 5 miles a day on average. Many days are bigger, some days are smaller, often with a kid on their back. And they clock about 13,000 steps a day gathering plant foods. So, this is sort of the cliche, women gather, men hunt. Here's women gathering either berries on the left or digging for tubers on the right. So just to kind of give you an idea what, digging for tubers is pretty tough stuff. You've got these digging sticks. There's a party of women out last October digging for tubers. If it looks like hard work, that's because it is. But what they're getting there is wild roots. The roots, it's like a wild yam almost. They're not quite that juicy, and they're a lot more fibrous, but that's the same idea. So very starchy tubers are a big part of their diet. They'll come home and roast them on a fire. Berries are another big part of it, baobab fruits. And so, already we can see if you're a paleo diet aficionado, you know that starches are off the menu, right? No hunter-gatherer would ever eat starches. Well, tell that to a Hodza hunter-gatherer that lives on tubers for most of their lives. Everything is shared. This is a tuber called makalitaco, and that's a Hodza word for it. Very fibrous. You kind of chew on it, suck all the starch out, and then you spit out all the fiber typically. You still end up eating about 5 times more fiber every day than we do in the U.S. Men will collect these. These are baobab pods here. They off of these big fat baobab trees. They'll fall down, or men will knock them down and bring them back, and women will process the kernels out of them and pound them with rocks to get the sort of the nut meat out. So it's, if you know what you're doing, it's a landscape that's full of food and full of calories. Men go about 12 kilometers a day. They tend to go out by themselves because they feel like they have better luck hunting. They hunt with a bow and arrow they make themselves. These bows are so strong that every time they pull it back, it's like doing a one-arm pull-up. It's about 100 pounds of force, and they're smaller-bodied folks. They're shorter folks, so that's about their body weight, 110, 120 pounds. Incredibly powerful bows, and they make them themselves. And to watch a Hodza guy make a bow and arrows with a knife is just really incredible. Here's a man named Dofu fletching an arrow, and the string he has is sinew, sort of the muscle fibers from an animal that he shot some other day. The rule about putting feathers on a Hodza arrow, you want to make sure you get feathers from both wings of the bird, right? If you only get one wing, it doesn't stay straight. Anybody knows that. So anyway, I actually took this video of him making this. This is a man named Dofu making these arrows. And about a day later, I think it was a day later, out hunting. So you walk a lot if you're a Hodza man. Miles and miles a day, just scouring the landscape for game. So about a day later, that Dofu got this impala. So he did what you typically would do: is he hit the impala with the arrow, and then he let it run. And he came back to camp and he said, "Hey guys, I think I got an impala." And they said, "Cool." So they all went out together, and you track through the landscape about 1.5 miles from where he hit it with the arrow. You track the impala, and it's impossible. I mean, I grew up hunting in rural western Pennsylvania. It's hard enough to track an animal when you have snow and you're hunting with a gun, and so there's a lot of blood. That's the blood. You see that right there? That's blood. That's a blood mark. And actually, that's so obvious that a Hodza kid could see that. I was very proud of myself for seeing that one. Typically, they just go and go and go, and you have no idea what they're following, and you kind of think they're making it up, and maybe they're just having a laugh, and then they find an impala underneath the bushes. So it's just almost magic watching them track the point I'm trying to get across is that between the knowledge of the plants and the foods that are available and the ability to do this kind of work, this is not intellectually simple work. This is incredibly sophisticated and hard thinking kind of work to do. These guys are incredibly smart. They're incredibly skilled. And I say that because often you hear about, it must have been a simpler time. Not really. It's actually really complicated and hard to do. I also point out the Nature Conservancy shirt, which I think is hilarious. I don't think he understands the joke, but I think it's really great. Anyway, you butcher the deer, or the impala in this case, and you make yourself a little package to walk at home. And then one of the things that's beautiful about the Hodza culture is that everything gets shared. I'll talk about that in a second. When Hodza men aren't hunting game, they are collecting honey. And so you see this is a baobab tree. I was talking about the baobab fruits that come down, that they knock off the limbs here that fall naturally. You can see a couple of them scattered on the ground here. You notice this baobab tree is really scarred up. And the reason it's so scarred up is that Hodza men, you see these two guys here for scale, these how enormous these trees are. they will climb into the top of these trees and chop into them to get honey. And so they cut a small sapling beside the big tree down into pegs, and they'll pound the pegs in, and you can see him. He'll take that axe and he'll hit once into the bark. The bark's almost like cork. It's very soft. And then he'll use the back of the axe to take one of these pegs and pound it in for his next foothold or handhold, and just kind of keep on going up and up and up. And it's incredibly dangerous stuff. Men fall. You know, any guy over 40 or 50 has a story of falling out of a tree, and they get hurt doing it for sure. But it's such a big part of their diet that's it's worth it to them. It's what they do. He's got this bucket here, and again, these guys, they go out to the village, they trade for stuff. He got that bucket from somewhere. It's not too uncommon to see them with something like that. That's not wishful thinking. That's not like overly optimistic. He'll fill that with honey. He'll fill that whole thing with honey, and he'll fill himself up, and then he'll take that back to camp and give it to everybody at camp. And so honey is actually a huge part of the diet in hunter-gatherers. Not just the Hadza. We know from other groups as well, honey is a sort of an untold part of the story here that's a really big part of hunter-gatherer diets all over the globe. Honey is not special. It's just fructose and glucose. It's actually about the same percentage fructose as high fructose corn syrup. And it makes up about 20% of their diet, 15 to 20% of the diet by calories. So, already, again, between the starchy tubers and the amount of fructose they're eating in their honey, we can begin to see, wait a second, the stories we hear, the stories we tell ourselves about what the paleo world was like are typically bullshit, right? We can just be frank about that. And it leads you to wonder, well, what else do we think we know that maybe isn't really true, or that we don't really know? And if we don't understand our past, how do we understand our present? So it begins to raise all these questions. Kids are kids the world around, and Hodza kids are really fun. I'll say this, we always bring nature guides. We presume, although I don't know why there's a tiger on that, anyhow. I think that's a Scholastic book or something like that. But anyway, we bring nature guides out with us that have all the local taxa, because we want to know if we see something, we want to know what it is. But what's really cool is the Hodza kids will take those books and just go through them page by page. They're in English, so the kids can't read them, but they'll just go picture by picture, and they'll tell stories with each picture about what each species is. And they're telling stories. You might remember the one time we saw that one, and the one time that it's just rich for them, and they just love it. We also show movies at night on our laptops. We have movie nights, and the two big players, the two big things that always are gangbusters, are anything from the Jurassic Park series. That you don't need to understand the language to know that at all. If you've ever thought to yourself, this script is terrible, maybe just don't listen to the script, because the Hodza don't, and they think it's great. And nature documentaries. They love nature documentaries, which is kind of sweet to me that they live there, and this is an intact ecosystem. It's all around them, but they just love it so much that it's still entertaining to them. Occasionally, you get one of these nature documentaries that goes all over the world, and then they have questions, because they know that the Jurassic Park stuff's made up. They get that. But we were watching one once, and it had walruses on it. And this one woman came up to me afterwards, and she said, "Herman, that wasn't real, right? That was like a dinosaur from the dinosaur movie." And I said, "No, that's a walrus." And she's like, "Okay, but what are they like really?" And I was like, "Well," and my Swahili's not very good, but I said, "It's like a hippopotamus with legs like a fish and teeth like an elephant." And I thought that's pretty good. And she was like, "You're messing with me." And I don't think she ever really believed that walruses are real. But in a place that never has any snow or ice, maybe that's an understandable assumption. Anyway, kids are kids all over the world. This is a couple of Hadza kids learning with their aunt how to dig tubers. So you grow up learning this stuff. You don't get good enough to do it sort of at the adult level until you're about 15, 16 years old. So that long childhood period is a human universal. And humans are so complex and sophisticated in how we make a living, even in a context like this, that You can't be an adult until you're in your late teens or early 20s. That's not just a recent phenomenon from schooling and college and all that stuff. That's actually how it is there too. Kids go and get water. That's the one thing they can do from an early age. And so that's a pretty typical thing, water and firewood. But I want to get back to the sharing thing. If everybody at the end of the day comes back with their water or their honey or their tubers or their meat or whatever it is, and you share, and that's an imperative. It's a cultural imperative. You have to share. And in fact, there's no word for please in Hodza because there's no need for the word please because it's assumed that you will share. And I wanted to think about that in terms of how did hunting and gathering shape our bodies. I think that's a fascinating question. I think it's equally fascinating to wonder how it shaped the way that we behave, right? Humans, in the right circumstances, can be incredibly communal, sharing, nice organisms. This, a group of individuals who don't know each other like this in chimpanzee world would be a bloodbath very quickly. Bonobos would be very nice to each other, but a lot of non-human primates would not get along like this in this kind of context with strangers. Moreover, who here bought their friend a beer tonight? Like 4 people? Honest to God, I'm in the wrong room. It's pretty typical for humans, not in case this might be news to some of you, to buy food for your friends. And we do that. We give food to our friends. In fact, you probably haven't had a big event in your life, a birthday or a wedding or any kind of celebration like that that didn't involve sharing food, right? Food sharing is a human universal, and proactively sharing food, going out to the store and buying tons of food to bring back to your house so you can give it away. That's crazy, right? But humans do it all the time, and we don't even think about it. That's just normal for us. And that sharing, that proactive sharing is a big part of your culture. It ties us together. That's a hunting and gathering thing. That goes back at least that far. And so sharing is a really big, important part of the human story, and it's something that you see every day with the Hodza. Here's a Hodza woman and her grandson with food that she just brought back. And so sharing has these friendship components to it. It also has these familial components to it, right? You share across generations. That helps you raise your kids. All right, I'm going to get to some science really soon, I promise. So now that we have had a little bit of intro to what the Hodza are all about, put some numbers on it. They're incredibly physically active. If you count up how many minutes in the day, they're getting what we call moderate and vigorous physical activity, so things that get your heart rate up, like walking briskly for a bus would be MVPA. Digging for tubers is MVPA. They get about 2 hours a day. You, if you're a typical American, maybe got like 5 minutes today of this. And because they're so active, they don't get high blood pressure. They don't get diabetes. We've checked. They're very, very healthy. And, of course, they don't have any issues with obesity. And so one of the first things we did as an evolutionary biologist, I was very interested in the energetics of this economy. We went to measure how many calories they burn every day, because this seemed to be such an obvious, important, integral part of the story. If you boil life down to its essence, biologically speaking, life is a game of turning energy into kids, right? That's the meaning of life, is to take resources and make offspring. That might not be the meaning of your life, but of life in general, that's reproduction is the point. And you need energy to do that. And so energetics is this really important piece of the puzzle to understand any organism, and we wanted to understand how energetics worked here, how daily calories a day, the energy that they're burning through every day, works in a hunting and gathering situation. And of course we knew, because they're so physically active, that they would be burning tons more energy than we do. And so we just wanted to understand how much more is it. So I want you to just imagine in your mind whatever you think that number would be. Is it 20% more than us here sedentarily in the room? Who thinks 20% more? Who thinks more than 20% more? 50% more? 100% more? Okay. Who thinks, okay, so most of you were over 20% more. So you got that in mind. I want you to have, some skin in the game when I show you the data. So we use this technique called doubly labeled water, which is this isotope tracking technique. I'll talk about it in detail to anybody who asks, but I'll save you it right now. Basically, we actually can measure how much carbon dioxide your body makes every day. So it's a very reliable, accurate, it's the gold standard measurement actually for getting calories a day outside of a laboratory setting. It's very precise, it's very accurate, And nobody had ever done this before in hunter-gatherers. So it was our chance to be the first group who did this. And we measured energy expenditure using this. Total calories, all the calories you burn every day in this group, 30 men and women. And then we compared it to Westerners. And here were the data. Surprise. It's completely the same. This is corrected for body size, by the way. If we don't correct for body size, they actually burn less than we do because they're a bit smaller bodied than we are. They're a bit shorter. But if you correct for body size, because bigger people burn more calories, the Hodza actually burn about 2,500 calories a day, just like you do. You think you burn 2,000 calories a day, but that's not true. You've been lied to. You burn about 2,500 calories a day, and so do they. And we were like, what the hell's going on? Because we got this grant and did all this work to go show how many calories they burn, and it really wasn't the case. And so we thought, okay, well, let's go check some other hunting and gathering societies. There aren't many others, but we were able to get a hold of a couple others. The next thing we did is work with this group called the Shuar. Different ecology. They live in the Amazon basin, but also a lot of hunting and gathering. A little bit of simple farming. No sort of big like John Deere tractor kind of farming, but sort of hand tool farming, subsistence level farming in the Amazon basin. Very different ecology, very wet and hot, but still, like the Hodza, very physically active. And so just to give you the snapshot there, if we look at activity, who's wearing a Fitbit or a smartwatch that measures steps here, right? So if we give them those kind of devices, and we ask how active they are every day, they're much more active in the red there than an industrial population like these Canadian kids. And so again, they're much more physically active. They should be burning a lot more calories. It's the same again. We compare them to age-matched, size-matched kids in the US and the UK. Same energy expenditures. No difference. Well, maybe it's these, maybe they're weird. So then we checked a group called the Chimani. I've been doing this for 10 years, so we collect populations like this. Similar to the Shuar, a lot of fishing, a lot of hunting and gathering, a little bit of farming. And here's what they look like. So this is physical activity a day. And so I have the Hodza on this graph too. And so you can see the Hodza, really physically active, just like I said, about 2 hours a day. The Chimani are just about as physically active. And just in case, maybe you think my lab's weird. So I got together all this other data from all these other studies, and I rank order them from, these are all the men. Sorry, I lost it on this slide. These are men, and these are women. So I took each study and I split it into men and women. So these are the cohorts from most active to least, Japan to the USA, and here for women as well. And then we can compare that to how many calories they burn every day, right? And if your intuition about this is correct, as my intuition would have been, we should see a very similar distribution of energy expenditures per day. But in fact, when we look at that, this is what we get. So it's not just my groups that don't have high energy expenditures, but notice that here we have rank ordered most to least, and that is not what's happening with energy expenditure. Here's rank ordered most to least. That's not what's happening with energy expenditure. So across populations, across studies, across labs, what we learn is that we've all been lied to. And what you've been told, I would imagine, and what makes intuitive sense is that if you're more physically active, you burn more calories every day. But that's not actually what happens. And I can tell you, I'm not going to show you the data right now, it's a different talk, but this isn't just humans. We see this in laboratory studies where animals are forced to work harder and harder and harder to get their food. They work harder and harder and harder, but they don't burn more and more calories. We see this when we compare animals who live in zoos to animals who live in the wild. Same energy expenditures, whether you live in the wild or you live in a zoo. And so what we're understanding now, based partly on this work with the Hodza, but also other work as well, is that physically active populations do not expend more energy each day. There's a disconnect there. Something's happening that's breaking up that expected relationship between activity and expenditure. And this is how it works. Imagine that you and your friend are both equally lazy. Okay. And if I were to take your energy budget in a given day, some amount would be spent on activity, and some amount would be spent on other stuff like immune function, reproduction, homeostasis, et cetera, et cetera. Now you, on the right, decide to change your lifestyle, and you decide to get active. And what would happen is, for a few weeks, we would see your energy budget change until your body adjusted to that new level of activity. And then what would happen is a bunch of systems that we're still trying to understand all the details to would kick into place and would adjust to suppress other activity so that your total expenditure would be about the same as it was when you started. This is one reason that exercise is a terrible tool for weight loss. And that's not just my work. That's lots. In fact, I don't work on weight loss specifically, but lots of studies throughout the last 20 or 30 years of trying to tackle the obesity epidemic have looked at exercise as a tool to fix obesity, and it never works. Right? If you go on an exercise program tomorrow, hard exercise program, you change your lifestyle. If you don't worry about if you don't do anything about your diet and you just do exercise, you can expect to lose 4 pounds in a year. Okay? That's the amount that you typically change. And it all happens in the beginning before your body adjusts. Afterwards, you just plateau. Now, you should exercise anyway. And here's why. You see how you cut out all this stuff you didn't need? Sorry, so daily energy expenditure is constrained. But you see how you cut out all this stuff you didn't, you have less of this other stuff? Well, that other stuff includes things like inflammation and sky-high reproductive hormone levels and really high stress reactivity and all these things that are bad for you. So exercise kind of makes your body spend less on that bad stuff and is actually really good for you for that reason. So it's not a great it's not a great weight loss tool, but it's absolutely essential for being healthy. And actually that constrained energy mechanism is part of the reason why it's so important. Okay, so exercise is essential, but to end obesity, we need to fix our diet. And so let's ask the Hodza then what we should do to fix our diet. What would a paleo diet actually look like? And I don't have a whole lot to tell you. We're almost done here, so don't fall asleep yet. But we'll finish up on what the Hodza would have to tell us about a paleo diet. The main thing they would tell us is there is no paleo diet. The paleo diet is a myth. Okay? This is 260 traditional populations. Every dot here is a population. And a lot of these data come from, over the last couple of centuries as people explored the world, before most of the world became industrialized. A lot of these populations are no longer hunting and gathering. But we have good data on what they were eating. And so we know the percentage of diet they were getting from plants and the percentage of that diet they were getting from animals. And what you see is it's a total mix, right? The average in this case is not the message, right? The take-home thing you should have in your head is not what the average is, because that's not very meaningful. Every one of these dots is a healthy, natural paleo diet. And some populations eat a lot of plants, and some populations eat a lot of meat. And there is no one paleo diet. That's a myth. Instead, people eat whatever's around. So if you live in the Arctic, you don't eat many plants. Surprise, surprise. If you live in the Arctic, you eat a lot of meat. Okay. So the point is, they're incredibly diverse. However, what they share across all these diets is they don't have a lot of processed foods. They don't have a lot of energy-rich, easy-to-get foods. And let me show you what I mean by that. Traditional diets are diverse. Modern diets are perverse, and here's how they're perverse. If you go to the supermarket today and you look at how energy-dense the food is that you can buy, in other words, how many calories per bite, and then you look at how expensive per bite they are, or how much you spend per calorie, I should say, you'll notice a really weird, perverse thing. The really energy-rich foods are the ones that are cheapest to get. That would be completely the opposite of the situation you'd find in the wild. In the wild, the easy foods to get are the ones that aren't very energy rich, right? You can come home with 20 pounds of tubers in about a half-hour work. To get an impala, you've got to hunt for days, okay? So this negative relationship here, where the more energy-dense foods are actually easier to get, is completely perverse. It's the first time this ever happened in the history of the world. And it's this weird zoo that we've built for ourselves that has this weird, perverse structure of diet availability in it. The other thing that's really strange about our modern diets is this. If we look at how much energy you can get for an hour of work, we can look at the Hodza. We can ask how many calories do they get after an hour of work. And we can say, well, for an hour's worth of middle-class wages, how much food energy can you buy in the U.S.? It's out of whack. We can get a lot more energy here. And actually, that comparison is that was the case in 1907. Now, it's actually that. We can get about 20 times as many calories in an hour of work as a Hodza person could in that same amount of effort. And so we live in a ridiculously strange and terrifying food environment where food is super easy to get, it's really energy dense, it's super processed, and that's, folks, the reason that we get sick from our diets. That's what's making you sick if you're getting sick from your food, is just how available all that energy is. Okay, so just to wrap it up quick, exercise is absolutely essential for health. I'm not telling you not to exercise, you still have to exercise. But it's not going to help you lose weight, and it's not going to fix our obesity crisis in the U.S. or in around the globe, because there isn't this one-to-one correspondence between if you exercise more, you're going to burn more calories. It's not how it works. Your body adapts to your lifestyle. Your metabolism adapts to your lifestyle. And we learned that, in part, by doing this work with the Hodza and other traditional societies. Obesity has more to do with our diet than our activity levels. And if we take a look at this Hodza kid here growing up, this Hodza kid is never going to get diabetes. He's never going to get heart disease. He probably won't get cancer. The things that we're likely to die from, this kid is protected from. And it's not because of diet or exercise, it's because of diet and exercise. It's both of them together. It doesn't hurt that he spends his life outside surrounded by family and friends, right? So the stress levels are also a lot more manageable in a society like that. And I think that's an important piece of this too. So we still have a lot to learn from groups like this. And I look forward to doing more of this work and getting more of these discoveries in the future. If we have time, I'd love to take questions. Thank you. Yes.
That was fantastic. Thank you. One of your slides mentioned that the average life expectancy of 15 for a Hodza is about 53. And I guess my question is, what do they die of, and what's the range there?
Yeah.
And is that obviously different from ours?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, nobody wants to swap places. That's the other thing that I think is wrong about the kind of paleo movement, is this idea that we should sort of cosplay as hunter-gatherers and not vaccinate our kids or that kind of. I mean, the Hodza would love the opportunities to get antibiotics and vaccines like we have, because that's what kills them, even in those older ages, or maybe especially in those older ages, are pneumonias and other infections that if they were here in the U.S., we'd give them, antibiotics. So it's still a rough life, and it still isn't as long as ours, even if you make it to 50, and it's because of those preventable reasons. That's right. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't clear. The bees there don't make hives. They make their hives in the hollows of limbs. Sorry. Thank you. I wasn't clear about that. So they always have their axe with them, and they'll go up and they'll chop into these limbs, into the hollows of these limbs, and they're like up to their shoulders inside these big baobab limbs, getting the shit stung out of them. And they use smoke to try to calm the bees down, but it doesn't always work. And they just get enormous. I mean, it really is just honey. I got stung by one of those bees once, and I almost went home. It was so painful. I felt like such a wimp. They're not like the bees I grew up with in Pennsylvania. Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Right. So I think the question was, how do you square the observation that they have such a sugar and starch rich diet with the fact they're so healthy? And the answer is that there's still an energy balance, right? So they're not getting obese, and most of the issues that happen, I would even go to say all of the issues that are that we associate with starches and sugars in our lives today are only problematic insofar as they lead to eating too much. And they only lead to eating too much because they tend to be in processed foods that we have a hard time resisting. And so you can have a plant-based diet that is very healthful and is starch-based. You can have a very meat-heavy diet that's very healthful and very starch-based. That's what the randomized controlled trials tell us. That's what you take. This isn't my work, but there are nice studies out there that say you take 300 people, you assign them to high-carb, mixed, low-carb diets, and the one thing you control is that they don't overeat, so that they lose weight. And everybody has diabetes measures that get better. Everybody loses weight equally. People have the equal amount of time equal success staying on their diets. And so there's been this demonization of sugar and starch by some folks in the sort of the diet wars these days, and the data don't really support that. What the data support is if you have a diet that helps you get to a healthy weight and keeps you at a healthy weight, whether it's plant heavy or animal heavy, you're going to see health improvements in either case. I hope that helps. It's about moderation. And if you feel hungry all the time and you can't lose weight, you're on the wrong diet. And if you are really successful on a keto, heavy paleo diet, and you only eat meat, and you've had great success with that, fantastic, stick with it. I'm not trying to change anybody's diets. But it really is finding a diet that doesn't make you overconsume calories. That's the trick for every diet. Yeah? Uh-huh. They eat the same mix. Those pictures were a bit misleading. What you didn't see there was the women will come back and take all the tubers and put them in a pile and cook them up. And then guys will come by and pick out tubers and take them back to the men's area and eat them. So they eat the same stuff. That's right. That's right. Yes. Oh, yeah. So you notice they're wearing T-shirts and shorts, right? They can make anything they need. They can make skins or whatever into clothes. But it's just like I think any of us would appreciate. A nice, soft cotton T-shirt's hard to beat. And so, they live in a really remote part of the savannah, but they can walk, and to them it's not a hardship to walk a couple days into a village and trade. They'll often trade honey, or sometimes meat, or sometimes they'll have some cash to get clothes. And so that's what they prefer to wear just because it's more comfortable. So again, the Amish is a really good kind of mental template for them because who's seen the movie The Gods Must Be Crazy? You ever seen that? If you haven't, you should. It hasn't held up over time, I don't know as well, but it's an interesting movie. But the whole premise of that movie is a little bit problematic in that it makes the assumption, the premise of the movie is that there's this uncontacted group that has never seen the outside world, and they kind of get corrupted by a Coke bottle, actually, is how it starts. I don't think there are, outside of perhaps some parts of deep Amazonia in South America, there aren't groups like that these days that haven't been contacted. So the reason they haven't joined the rest of the outside developed world is because they don't want to. So they know about it, and they take the parts they like, and they leave the other stuff. Yeah. There's a couple dozen at least, maybe a few dozen. No, I mean I've worked in over a dozen of them. The camps I've spent a lot of time in, 3 or 4 camps I've spent a lot of time in. Yeah, so they're defined by a hunting and gathering culture and by a language and by a set of beliefs about, cultural norms and that kind of stuff. And the camps are people can move between the camps very fluidly, and they often do. Camps are often about a day's walk apart, maybe a little bit less. And if you walk fast, you can kind of get out to a camp and back pretty readily. And so people will kind of swing by camps and visit and come back. And so it's really fluid, The camps kind of stay in the same place, but people move between them really fluidly. Yeah, you with the glasses, sitting down, who's looking behind you. Yes. That's okay. Yes. See, that's a good question, right? Does that mean that you need to cut out cheese because you want to eat like a Hodza person? The reason that Hodza don't overconsume is, I think, isn't about any one kind of food. Their diet just isn't very tasty. I hate to tell you. There's not a lot of like sauces and processing, that kind of stuff. And there aren't like focus groups in a General Mills office somewhere figuring out how that they can make Doritos that you can't stop eating, right? And so their food is filling, and it's not, it's fine enough to eat, but you just don't, when you're full, you're full. And so all of that signaling works because you aren't eating this jacked up, crazy diet that is literally engineered to be irresistible. Obesity is more than about just one thing. It's a multifactorial, cultural, food. I mean, it's all of us together. But if I were to pick out one thing, it's that. It's the fact that we live in this food world where our diets are just ridiculously engineered. And so if you're going to cut something out, you know what I'd cut out? I'd cut out overly processed foods. And I'd keep the cheese. I like cheese. Yes. Oh, last question, I guess. Oh, great question. Family structure. So it's totally egalitarian. Men and women are totally equal. There's, mom, dad, and the kids, but they can get divorced. So often you see stepmom or stepdad as a family. Men are allowed to have more than one wife, but wives are also totally free to join a marriage or not. And so you got to be a pretty good Hodza guy to have more than one wife. It doesn't usually happen, but it's allowed. It just doesn't happen. And overall, I would just point out that it's a completely egalitarian society. There's no chief. There's no police. There's no government. There's no nothing. Nobody can tell anybody else what to do at all. Yeah. It's a libertarian ideal. I guess so, sort of. Do we? One more? Yes. Oh, good question. What's the basal metabolic rate? We don't have good basal metabolic rate measurements. Sorry. Thanks, guys. I think we have to go. I'm happy to talk more around here if there's time. Anyway, thanks.
Thanks, Dr. Pontzer. We will see you next month, March 10th, for Carolina Tigers.